welcome to a special 31st episode of Squib Kick Radio. I'm Riley Pollock, your host for this very special CFL preview episode. Today I'll be previewing each CFL team and predicting where they finish, as well as talk a whole bunch of other CFL stuff with this week's special guest, Addison Richards. Addison comes with a vast football background, playing receiver for the University of Regina Rams before being drafted to the Bombers, where he played for a few seasons. And now I understand you are finishing up school, and you just made it to nationals in flag football with a pretty stacked South Sask team. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing right, man. Always good to hear from you. And yeah, like you said, just kind of wrapping up the end of my degree, which is exciting. It's kind of been something that's been hanging over my head ever since I kind of made the jump to pro there, but I'm glad I'm back and finishing it up. And yeah, with that flag football, we get a chance to head to nationals in Saskatoon coming up in July, and yeah, it'll be a pretty good squad. And we're fighting for a chance to go play in Denmark at Worlds in 2020. So yeah, lots of good stuff to look forward to.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I played flag football here in Calgary for the first time last year, and it's a lot of fun. So that team you have there's got to be a bunch of good guys too, because looking at the picture, I can't believe that you guys even gave up a point or didn't score every single time you put the ball in the air.
Yeah, like you said, like flag football, just making the jump from obviously playing tackle for a number of years, it's a different game. Yeah, like it's a lot faster, and the field is a lot smaller. You gotta kind of be a lot more, quick on your feet. You can't be trying to run dudes over because they're pretty quick on the flag for an infraction there if they're too aggressive. But yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it'd be pretty cool to have a chance to go on a pretty life-altering trip to Denmark and play there. Yeah, see where you measure up against kind of the best in the world. Yeah,
that would be a pretty cool experience, whether you guys really wanted or not at that point. Just going to Denmark to play ball would be pretty sweet. Let's say we just dive right into this thing. We're going to start with a small preview of each team and what moves that they made in the offseason. And we'll start in the East with the Toronto Argonauts. I'll just run through some quick off-season additions and subtractions, and then you can tell me what you think of the team.
Beautiful.
All right. So the Argos have added running back Chris Rainey, running back Terrell Sutton, defensive back Kevin Fogg, and D-lineman Sean Lemon and Toby Antigua, as well as Darrell Walker, who, in my opinion, might be the biggest addition of them all, but they only really lost Daron Carter and linebacker Justin Tuggle, so it's largely the same team that they had last year. And man, does that backfield look nasty. They already have James Wilder Jr. and now Chris Rainey and Terrell Sutton. I mean, if whoever starts at quarterback for the Argos can play, this could be a pretty decent football team this year.
Absolutely, and it's kind of interesting. 1 year removed from a Grey Cup championship, they decided to part ways with head coach Mark Trespin. So in comes Corey Chamberlain, a guy that has championship experience going back to his time with the Riders. And yeah, you touched on kind of their quarterback situation. Is this finally the year that James Franklin sort of takes the reins and really runs with it and decides to be that number one quarterback option there in Toronto? And he certainly has the weapons at the backfield with Wilder, like you mentioned, and having Darrell Walker come, who, like you mentioned, is one of the premier receivers in the league, will be a nice safety net for the quarterback to kind of have, and hopefully he's able to take that next step. Because if he's able to, I think that they could be a dangerous team in the East.
Yeah, I mean, the East isn't exactly a great division, it doesn't look like this year, and it hasn't been amazing for the past few years, but they seem to pull out Grey Cups pretty frequently, even without the top division. But, I mean, it's open for the taking. I think Hamilton kind of sits at the top or near the top there, and then those other three teams, I think it's open for the taking. Is there anything else you like or dislike about this Argos organization before we move on?
I just hope, just from kind of a more broader perspective, that they're able to draw in some more fans and really stir up excitement about the CFL in Toronto, because that's such a big market, and it's a market that the league certainly needs to stay afloat. And winning always helps. So if they were able to kind of be competitive competitive in that East, and like you said, it's usually wide open, and I think it is going to be another wide open division this year. So if they're able to make a playoff run, I think that would go a long way to helping out the league as a whole.
Yeah, and I think maybe the whole tailgate thing that they got going on in Ontario now might help them out as well, because who doesn't like a good tailgate? Tickets are cheap, so you party before, have a barbecue, and then go in and watch some pretty good football. I think hopefully that helps the Argos out a little bit this season.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on. Let's go to the Ottawa Redblacks, and what an offseason this team had, and I don't think it was necessarily for the better. They added Jonathan Jennings, wide receiver Ryan Langford, linebacker Nick Boulay, and receiver Caleb Hawley, as well as Kevin Francis, but man, did they lose some players. Their franchise quarterback, Trevor Harris, the best running back in the league last year, William Powell, an amazing O-lineman in Sir Vincent Rogers, who did get hurt switching over to Edmonton already. They lost Greg Ellingson, DB Rico Murray, and AC Leonard. I mean, can you fill those holes from free agency? And did they? And do you think they can still fight it out at the top of the East with all the players that they lost?
Yeah, like you mentioned, they had a really tough offseason, and then add to all those player departures fairly close to when you're starting to gear up for training camp. Their offensive coordinator, Jamie Elizondo, leaves for an XFL job. So yeah, where does that leave a team that already loses their big name quarterback at Trevor Harris, bringing in Jonathan Jennings, who came onto the scene in BC and did very well for a guy his age, and then has sort of struggled the last few years, kind of giving way to Travis Lulay the last few years in BC. I think that he still has a ton of potential. I think the other guy that will be challenging him for his position, a guy that I got to play with, Dominic Davis, who's kind of just been waiting in the wings with Winnipeg, and then now with Ottawa, kind of waiting for his chance to finally take a shot at the starting job. It'll be interesting how the training camp competition shakes down heading into the regular season for those guys. And then you also touched on losing William Powell. I think that's huge. I also agree. I think he is one of the premier backs in the CFL. And then the Buds, unfortunately, split up. Sinockley and Ellingson. Ellingson, again, a guy that's probably coming off an off year in terms of production, where he was, up among the league leaders a couple of seasons ago. Had a little bit of dip in production, but I think is every bit as dangerous to be a number one receiver in the CFL. So, yeah, offensively, there's going to be a lot of questions, and I think if they're able to develop Jonathan Jennings and maybe kind of withstand some early season struggles, I think that they're coming off a Grey Cup. I mean, there's still a good amount of the core that played in that game. So again, they'll be a part of that wide open East.
All right, yeah, Ottawa is a super wild card for me. I mean, they've surprised me before, so I'm not gonna completely rule them out, but it's gonna be tough sledding for that Red Blacks team, especially on offense, like you said. All right, that's 2 of the 4 East teams. Let's head to Montreal to talk about the Alouettes, and they've struggled. They haven't been very good the past few seasons, but they added Devier Posey, DB Patrick Levels, linebacker Bo Lacombo, Jeremiah Johnson at running back. They only really lost Josh Stanford and Nick Boulay, as well as linebacker DJ Lalama. So this Montreal team, it's kind of an open battle at quarterback, I guess. I think Antonio Pipkin has the inside track now that Johnny Manziel is gone. Does Montreal finally have what it takes to be competitive in the East this season? Do you see them making the proper strides?
I think they're going in the right direction. I still think that there's probably some stuff off the field in terms of their front office and just their organization as a whole that still has some mending to do. But I think they're taking the right steps in terms of personnel they've acquired. They survived the Johnny Manziel kind of, I guess we could finally call it a disaster after last year. So I think they're finally ready to move forward from that. I do like Antonio Pipkin. I kind of liked what I saw from him last year. And I think he should be the front runner to start a quarterback there. I really like the pickup of Jeremiah Johnson. I really liked him with the Lions, and I think that he could do a lot for the Alouettes team. And I think also adding Taylor Loeffler on defense will bring a bring a different attitude to the defense as a whole, as a hard-hitting Canadian safety. So I think that maybe they were probably 1 or 2 years away from really taking a run at the East, but definitely going in the right direction.
All right, yeah, Montreal, it's tough for me to give them any sort of rating. I mean, it's been such a mess the last couple seasons. But with how open the East is, you just never know, and I definitely think they will be a better team than they were last season. All right, final team in the East here as we move along on this CFL season preview on Squib Kick Radio, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and they added defensive back Tunde Adeleke. Jaguar Davis comes over from Calgary on the D-line, Rico Murray, and they added Cameron Marshall from the Riders, who has shown some flashes of brilliance as well. They lose linebacker Larry Dean, Don Unamba, and running back Mercer Timmis, so not crazy losses. The defense takes a bit of a hit for the Tiger Cats, but are the Tiger Cats kind of the runaway leader in the East in this preseason before we've really seen them on the field?
I still think they are. Like you said, they didn't lose a ton of kind of their core players that did a really good job last year. My only thing is they did lose their head coach June Jones, which again fairly close to getting ready for showtime for the season, and he decided to part ways with the team. He was somebody that really had a really positive impact, especially offensively and especially on the role of their star receiver, Brandon Banks, who was kind of a special situation / special teams player before Coach Jones was there. And then all of a sudden he was one of the most productive receivers in the entire CFL. So I assume that the roots of that offense will stay the same. So I would anticipate him still having a pretty big role in the offense. And if Jeremiah Mazzoli can keep playing at pretty much an MOP level, they certainly could again be a favorite in the East.
Yeah, the loss of June Jones is definitely huge. I think Jeremiah Masoli has most outstanding player capabilities since June Jones has come and really helped him out and thrust him into that starting role. So it'll be interesting to see how Masoli performs this year without Jones taking over the reins. All right, that's the East. Me and Addison wrapping up the East preview. Let's head over to the West, where it's going to be an absolute dogfight again, I think, this season. I really have no idea which way it's going to go, but I will give it my best educated guess. Let's start with the Stamps. Not a whole lot of free agent additions for the Stamps. Courtney Stevens comes over, the defensive back, but they lost a lot. They lost Spencer Wilson, receiver Devers Daniels, Tunde Adeleke's gone, Micah Johnson's gone, Patrick Levels is gone, Troy Stoudemire's gone, Jaguar Davis, and Randy Richards. Every single one of those players has left the Stamps. Now, we've seen them lose players before and come back with a vengeance. They seem to have a really good scouting department there, but is this the year a West team takes over Calgary at the top?
I want to say yes, but you've already kind of mentioned it. It seems over the years they are able to kind of have a revolving door with their roster. They're able to develop really great players that go on either to other teams or to NFL opportunities. And it just seems like new guys roll in and are able to replace them no problem. So that's a credit to their scouting department. And they'll still have Coach Dickinson and Bo Levi Mitchell leading the charge at quarterback, so you can't really ever count them out. What kind of jumps out to me is there's going to be as many as 7 new faces on defense, including somebody that has to replace Alex Singleton, the star Canadian linebacker who's off to the Philadelphia Eagles. And also on offense, losing DeVaris Daniels, who's a really talented young receiver. I think that'll be a noticeable loss, but again, they're pretty stacked at receiver there. If Kamar Jordan is able to come off the injury and return to his star form, they have a lot of good Canadians in Juwan Brescison, as well as Regina boy Richie Sandani, who I think is primed to break out at one of the Canadian spots on the field. So it seems like if there was a year that somebody was going to overtake Calgary, this would be it. But again, they're such a kind of a well-oiled machine organization that you've got to think that they have some plans in place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, As a Rider guy, born and raised, it's tough to see Calgary do so good, but there's almost, as I get older and like I've been around the team a little bit more now that I live in Calgary, and it's almost more of an appreciation for the ability to overturn that roster year after year and still be the class of the CFL. All right, that's the Calgary Stampeders. Let's take a look at the Edmonton Eskimos, who made some huge moves and many would say won free agency this year. They added QB Trevor Harris, linebacker Larry Dean, Sir Vincent Rogers, who is hurt but isn't expected to be season-ending. Jovan Santos Knox, the linebacker from Winnipeg, comes over. Greg Ellingson, Don Unamba, wide receiver Tavares Daniels, Anthony Orange, Ricky Collins, and Travis Bond. I mean, this is a whole new roster almost for this Eskimos organization. They lose quarterback Mike Riley, of course, who was the face of the franchise for a long time. Aaron Grimes leaves. He was pretty good on their defense. Josh Woodman's gone, and Darrell Walker. So they did lose some big players, but I think they made up for it in the overall depth that they picked up in the offseason. Are these additions... With these additions, are the Esks the early West frontrunners in your mind?
I certainly think that they're a playoff contender. I'm not sure if it's enough to put them over the top. It's going to kind of be how that they are able to gel with each other throughout the whole season. Certainly, like you mentioned, the Mike Riley era is over in Edmonton for Jason Moss's team. They bring in a guy, Trevor Harris, coming off a Grey Cup loss where certainly he didn't play his best and kind of made it known that he was extremely hungry and anxious to get back to work and get back out there and try to get back to the championship game. He comes over to the team. He brings one of his star receivers, Greg Ellingson, with him, a guy that we already talked about with the Ottawa preview, as well as Tavares Daniels. So I think those two guys are kind of enough to fill the hole that was left by Darrell Walker. I think that they'll fit in there quite well. And another guy that you mentioned, Jovan Santos Knox, coming over from Winnipeg, a guy that I got to see up close and personal. He was kind of sitting in Adam Bighill's back pocket the entire last season with Winnipeg, just learning. So I think that he's going to be an impact player for that Eskimo defense. So some good additions. They'll just see how they gel over the course of the season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at them on paper and it looks pretty nasty. I still think their defense isn't amazing. I definitely don't think it is the best in the West for sure. But if Trevor Harris and Greg Ellingson can click, and if Harris can get with Tavares Daniels, it could be a dangerous passing attack for that Edmonton Eskimos team. All right, we have knocked off Calgary and Edmonton. Let's head out even further west and talk about the BC Lions. They have added Mike Riley, the prized possession of free agency. They spared no expense to get him. They got Lamar Durant from Calgary. Suk Chung comes over on the O-line. Aaron Grimes plays defensive back for them. Josh Stanford, the always energetic Deron Carter, and linebacker Malachi Harris. They lost quite a few players, though, and I think it has a lot to do with Mike Riley and his contract situation. I mean, they're paying him $800,000 plus, and that's a lot to play a quarterback. So they lost Anthony Orange, Devier Posey, Ricky Collins, Manny Arsenault's gone, Bola Combo's gone, Chris Rainey, Sean Lemon, Jonathan Jennings, Winston Rose, Terrell Sutton, and Micah Always. So they do get Mike Riley on the offense, but they lose a lot to get him. Can BC do it with just Mike Riley and a few pieces around him since they lost so much?
You know what? Honestly, looking at this team, just kind of touching on, they have a new coach. They have Devon Claybrooks in there coming over from Calgary. Yeah. They also have former players, Nick Lewis, Drew Tate, Keith Stokes, so a lot of guys that have a lot of experience. I think Ryan Phillips is in there as well, former BC All-Star defensive back. So they have a lot of veteran leadership in the coaches' room to start with. You mentioned Mike Riley, a guy who is kind of in the MOP conversation every single year. You don't know what you're going to get out of Deron. If he's focused on football, that's going to be a pretty exciting connection to watch throughout the season. I think bringing Suk Chung over to BC, guy who's coming home. He's a local guy, one of the nasty characters on the offensive lines in the CFL. I think he'll bring some leadership there, and I think with that group, kind of like we touched on with the Argos, that will kind of garner some excitement out on the west coast of Canada and maybe make that team a little more relevant. I think because that market's been struggling a little bit over the last few years. So
yeah,
some exciting additions, and kind of similar to Edmonton. We'll just kind of have to wait and see how they gel. But I think for me personally, between Edmonton and BC, I think that I like BC's additions a little bit more. Like you did mention, they shelled out a lot of dough for Riley, so will they be able to sustain it kind of past a 1-year window? That'll kind of remain to be seen, but I think this team has a lot of excitement going forward this season.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like with the Mike Riley addition and some other moves that there is a bit more of a buzz around the BC Lions this offseason than there has been in previous years. So hopefully that can put some butts in the seats at BC Place, because there was a time when they were getting, 45, 50,000 people out, and it wasn't that long ago. And it just seems like all interest has died there, or a lot of it. So hopefully they can get back to their winning ways, because the Lions were really a premier organization for a lot of the 2000s and beyond that. So hopefully the Lions can get back to where they were, and maybe Mike Riley can help get them there. All right. Your former team, your boys, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, big additions on defense for them. They pick up Willie Jefferson, DB Winston Rose, and linebacker DJ Lalama. They lose Jovan Santos Knox, Suk Chung, Kevin Fogg, and Ryan Langford. Did the Bombers make enough moves to take the next step this year?
So yeah, lots to touch on with this team. I got a little more insight from these guys, but they did lose a lot of guys. Offensive line, defensive secondary. So they will look different, but I think that there's still a lot of continuity for Mike O'Shea's group. Certainly, Matt Nichols is back. Looks to have had a great offseason. He's looking a little more mobile after kind of having a knee issue early on in camp, and then he kind of got it out the entire year. Harris is back in the backfield, getting up there in age, but he doesn't seem to slow him down. He seems to still come back in great shape and is a two-way threat. Able to come out of the backfield in the passing game. I really like the return of Chris Matthews, playing receiver there. I think he might finally be that big target they've been looking for a while to kind of complement Darvin Adams. Defensively, like you said, Willie Jefferson comes over, adding to a defense that already has Adam Bighill, Craig Rowe, Jackson Jeffcoat. That's kind of a scary bunch in the front seven. And my big question will just be how that defensive backfield sort of starts to gel, because replacing a guy like Chris Randall or Maurice Leggett, guys that have been mainstays there for the past number of seasons, if they can get it together and sort of limit the big plays, it should be formidable on defense. Looking at the O-line, losing Suk Chung, I think is big. Losing Matthias Kusin at center, who retired prior to the season, will be big losses. But I think you have a guy like Michael Couture, who's been around the team kind of as that 6th or 7th O-lineman. He'll be able to step in, I think, at that center spot. And then you also have Jeff Gray, who's coming back. He's a Winnipeg boy from kind of an NFL practice roster tour. He's back there and should be able to slot in on that O-line somewhere. And on the special teams, Justin Medlock is back, so the kicking game will be solid. So I think they've kind of been knocking on the door. They've been getting closer and closer. They got to that West Final last year. Personally, obviously, would love to see them take the next step and then finally get to that Grey Cup game. I think there's enough veteran leadership there, and certainly great coaching staff as well. So I'd put them certainly in that top of the Western race.
All right, yeah. I mean, it's tough for me to say as a Rider fan, and I know that you switched allegiances when you got drafted by the Bombers. But this Bombers team, if they gel correctly and if Matt Nichols can play well, They could be a very, very dangerous team this season. All right, and we have to end off with the Riders because they're probably our biggest fan base that listens to the show is Rider fans, so save the best for last, hopefully. The Riders picked up William Powell, Micah Johnson, AC Leonard comes back, and Manny Arsenault, who is still injured but is out there practicing, can't really do all the contact stuff yet, but they expect him back around Labor Day or even before that, the way he's going. They do lose Willie Jefferson, Toby Antigua, Caleb Hawley, and Cameron Marshall. So kind of a balance out almost in almost every position here is they lose Toby Antigua and Willie Jefferson, but get Micah Johnson and AC Leonard. Manny Arsenault comes over to replace Caleb Hawley, and Cameron Marshall leaves, but William Powell comes back. So this Riders defense might be even better than they were last year. But do you think their offense can get it together with Zach Collaros this year?
That is the great question. Yeah, like that's an all-league defense they have, and like you kind of mentioned, going back to last year, that defense won them a lot of games. Sometimes outscoring the offense, which is kind of unheard of between the defense and the special teams. You bring in a new head coach, but not a new coach to the team, and Craig Dickinson, who it seems by all accounts the players love and are willing to play for. I don't know if that was necessarily the same case with the Chris Jones experiment. I can't necessarily comment not being in that locker room, but he has moved on to an NFL opportunity, so it's now Coach Craig Dickinson's team. Zach Collaros is back at quarterback. There's not a bunch of proven depth behind him, so by all accounts, this will be his job going forward. And you know what? If that offensive line is able to keep him upright, maybe we do get to see the Collaros of a few years ago where he was one of the premier pivots in the league. He certainly does have help now in the backfield with William Powell, got mentioned a few times, coming from Ottawa. Should really help the run game a lot. Receiver-wise, bringing on Manny Arsenault certainly brings some veteran leadership. Even if he's not ready to go, he'll kind of help all those young receivers in the room progress. Going to that defense, again, probably the strength of the team. I mean, you look at up front, AC Leonard, Micah Johnson, Charleston Hughes, Zach Evans. That's a pretty scary defensive line if you're a quarterback looking out over the defense. So hopefully they'll be able to generate some pressure and generate some turnovers as well. And then you also look at they might have the best 1-2 punch at kicker punter in the league with now John Ryan coming home as well as Brett Lautner, who's now the undisputed number one kicker with the team, who just had an outstanding year last year, place kicking for the team. So I mean, there is certainly some reasons to be excited about this team, but again, it comes back to that offense, and if they're going to be able to generate plays in the passing game, and then obviously put points on the board.
Yeah, for sure. And John Ryan is currently the highest selling Rider jersey right now, which is hilarious. Probably the first time in punter history that has happened.
That's so awesome.
But yeah, that's there's some good moves there for the Riders, and realistically, it does just come down to if their offense can do the right things. I think their defense is going to do plenty, and I mean, with Craig Dickinson there, the special teams has been very, very good as well. So it's all down to the offense, and I'm not necessarily optimistic, but if you're right, if they can keep Zach Collaros from hitting the turf 4 or 5 times a game, and Odell Willis from head bombing into his head and giving him a concussion, then they might be all right. All right, that does it for our preview of each team. We're going to get into some division picks and placing teams. But first, I just wanted to ask you about this whole CFL 2.0 thing they got going on. There's a bunch of players from Mexico and Europe had all these camps, and they have to put one international player or world player, I guess, on the roster. And what do you think about this? It's a pretty cool thing they got going on right now.
I think it is really cool. I mean, it's a cool experiment trying to sort of make the league a little more global and generate some interest in some other markets. And by all accounts, it seems like the players that they've brought in for the most part are they're fitting in. They're working hard. They're competing for a job too. I've read about a few guys they've mentioned when they heard about this opportunity, they quit their job and started training.
Yeah.
And went to the combine and got this opportunity. So I think it's a cool idea. At the end of the day, I put some emphasis on the C in CFL, right? Trying to make sure there is still that Canadian representation. But I think it just makes for more interesting stories, and more guys getting a chance to live their dream. So that's at the end of the day, the best player will always play, right? You have all these things in place to roster allotments for whether it's Canadians or international players, but at the end of the day, they'll make the decision that the best player will play at the end of the day, and that'll keep it a level playing field.
Yeah, for sure, and I do agree with that C in the CFL thing. They were talking about dropping the ratio from 7 to 5, and I'm glad that they kept it the same for sure. All right, let's get to the fun part. We're going to put each team in order in the division and then pick a Grey Cup winner at the end of the show. Let's start with the East from last to first and why.
All right. Coming up in that fourth place spot, I'm probably going to stick the Alouettes there, just because I just don't think that they're there quite yet. We kind of touched on they're making some good moves. There's still some moves that might need to happen in the front office to get them to take that next step. But I think that they're 1 or 2 years away from really being a serious contender in the East again. So fourth place, I would go with Montreal. Third place, probably go with Toronto. I think that they'll certainly make the playoffs. I think that they'll be better. I feel like I think James Franklin will take another few steps in becoming that number one pivot and lead them to a playoff spot. And where they go from there, it being the East, it's kind of hard to tell. Second place, I'd go with Ottawa. I think whether it's Jonathan Jennings or Dom Davis, I think one of them will be able to step up and provide enough offense for them to stay competitive in the East. But I think it all comes down to Hamilton being that number one team. Even with the loss of the head coach, June Jones, I think there's just too much there with Jeremiah Mazzoli leading that offense. They'll have a solid defense again. So I think that Hamilton will probably be your representative from the East. Heading to the West, just grab my notes. Probably coming up at the bottom of the division. I'd unfortunately probably have to go with the Riders. I think.
Sorry to all our fans.
This division will obviously have a lot of competition, and it really could go either way. I mean, if you drop a few games here and there, I think it's going to be that tight where 1 to 5 might be only separated by a couple of games. So I think the Riders will be I'm just not convinced with their offense. Again, I think their defense will keep them in a lot of games, and I'm just not convinced with what they have on the offensive side of the ball. After that, I'd probably go with Edmonton. I think Trevor Harris will come in. He'll do a solid job, but I think that they're going to take a little more time to gel than say a BC that I think kind of brought in some bigger pieces for the organization. So I'd probably go with Edmonton at that four spot. I'd go with BC at the 3 spot. I think with Riley, Drawn Carter, there'll be a lot of offensive firepower. There'll be a lot of excitement with the team. They could easily, jump up to even as high as second, I think. But they'll certainly be competitive in the West. I'll go with Winnipeg at number 2. Again, just going back to, there's been a lot of consistency, a lot of continuity with that group. They have their quarterback. They have a solid defense. They're knocking on the door. I don't see them getting that number 1 spot. I think, again, that'll go to the Stamps, even with their roster turnover. I think that they just do too good a job in bringing in more players to sort of fill those holes, and then those guys going out and performing. So I think that they'll be the number one team, whether or not they're the Grey Cup representatives. Will shake down in November, but I think that they'll come out on top in the West again.
All right, we'll run through mine now here. I've got slightly different on both sides than you. First of all, in the East, I have to go with I'm gonna put Montreal at the 4 spot, like you did. I do think they'll be a lot better this year, but they still have a little bit to go. In the 3 spot, I'm gonna put Ottawa. I think they lost too much in the coaching staff and on the football field to challenge Toronto or Hamilton, and I say that because I'm gonna put Toronto at 2. I really do think James Franklin will be able to guide this team this year. I think he's going to take a step. I think he's hungry to prove that he's a starting quarterback, and I think Toronto's going to slide into that 2 spot with a very, very good offensive depth. They've got 3 good running backs and some good receivers there as well, and I think Jennings will benefit from that. And I do have Hamilton at the top and Jeremiah Mazzoli guiding that team to be the East representative of the Grey Cup. On the West side, it's insanely hard to choose the order of these 5 teams. I think literally any one of them could be first, and almost any one of them could be last place this year. But I have to disagree on the whole BC thing. I'm going to put them at 5, and it's only because I think they lost too much to gain Mike Riley, and I think that he proved last year that he can't be the only star on offense and guide them to the playoffs because Edmonton missed the playoffs last year. So I just think they gave up too much to get him, and they put too much salary towards him, and they're going to be very depleted at other positions besides quarterback. In the 4 spot, I will put my Saskatchewan Roughriders, but I do think that they're going to cross over. So that would leave Ottawa and Montreal out of the playoffs this year. I think the Riders will cross over. I just think that defense is insane. William Powell help out Caleros a lot. They can run, more play action, a few screens to get the defensive line to bite. I am a little worried about the receiving core for the Riders, but we'll see how that turns out. I have them at 4. I'm going to go with Edmonton at 3. The Esks made some big moves, and I think that it will benefit them on both sides of the ball, especially Jovan Santos Knox. I'd really watch for him to be maybe a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year this year. Second place, I'm going to put the Stamps. They can't possibly keep winning this division with all the players that they lose. I feel like this will be the year that they don't quite win the division, but it'll be close. And unfortunately, and I'm sorry to everyone who loves me, I'm going to put the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at first place. I just think that they are so deep on both sides of the ball. I think they've got so many weapons on both sides of the ball. And, Andrew Harris just doesn't stop. The kid is an absolute animal. And maybe this is the year that he gets 1,000 and 1,000. I know, like you mentioned, he is getting a little bit older. But he showed no signs of wear and tear last year. And I think that he will guide this team to a first place finish. All right. So those are mine. What do you think about that, Addy?
I like them, man. Like you said, that West is going to be so competitive. It's going to be fun to watch those teams go at it every week. And I think your arguments in the West for that, or for the East, for that 2-3 spot, very valid. This is getting me more excited for the season to start.
Yeah, I'm fired up now.
Week to week to see this stuff go down.
Okay, now I need to know who your 2 representatives for the Grey Cup are and who walks away with the prize in Calgary in November.
I'm going to go with Winnipeg and Hamilton, battling for the Grey Cup in November, and should be an exciting game come that time of year. And I think finally this is the year that Winnipeg finally gets one, ends the drought, and they're able to party in Manitoba there.
Wow, the drought is broken in Addison Richards' mind come November. I'm going to go with Hamilton in the East. I'm going to take... Like, you got to think the Stamps will figure it out by playoffs. So I'm going to go Stamps Hamilton with the Ticats winning it all in November. I think that the Stamps will choke in their own home building, and I'm so sorry to anyone listening from Calgary. But, I don't think... I like this Stamps team a whole lot, and I could see Jeremiah Masoli being the MOP at the end of the season.
I definitely agree with you there. Yeah, I think that he was already playing at a high level last season, and I'm excited what he's gonna do this year for that Hamilton team.
All right, before we end the show, let's hand out some early season awards. So I'm gonna ask you who your MOP, Most Outstanding Defensive Player, and Most Outstanding Canadian are, and then I'll give you mine after that. How do you like that?
Love it.
All right, let's start with Most Outstanding Canadian. Who do you got?
I'm gonna go with Lamar Durant.
Wow.
From BC, a guy that he's had a couple of really solid years with Calgary. He had the 1 year where he was down with a bit of an injury. He goes home to BC, and he gets to play with one of the premier pivots in the league. I could see him having a really strong season and bringing home that Most Outstanding Canadian award.
All right, I'm going to go with Andrew Harris just because I like to take it easy on myself, and I think he's going to approach the 1,000 and 1,000 this year with Winnipeg. So I think Andrew Harris will be the Canadian Most Outstanding Player. All right, who's your Most Outstanding Defensive Player this year?
I could see Adam Bighill taking it home. He's just too good. He rushes the passer well. He's great in coverage. He lays the boom and run support. If he's able to stay healthy, which, I mean, he works extremely hard in the off season for those 18 games. If he's able to stay healthy, lead that defense, I think it'd be a pretty good bet to see him win that Most Outstanding Defensive Player.
All right, and I'm going to go with your former boy, Jovan Santos Knox in Edmonton. I think he's going to have an unreal season. I think the way that Edmonton defense is set up is going to funnel a lot towards him, and I think he's going to dominate at the linebacker position for the Eskimos. And finally, who is your most outstanding player this season?
Well, if all goes as planned and the big investment plays off, I could see Mike Riley winning that award. New team, new energy. I do agree with you that if there's not enough dough to go around to sort of invest in other pieces, that will he be enough to sort of lead the charge a little more single-handedly? But if he's able to do it, he can make plays with his legs when needed, and he certainly loves to throw the deep ball. And they've got some guys there: Shaq Johnson, Duron Carter, Lamar Durant, guys that can go get that football, make plays with the ball in the air. I could see him winning that MOP award.
All right, and I've said it about 3 times already in this show, so I'm going to stick with my word and go with Jeremiah Masoli out in Hamilton. I just think that they, for the most part, kept that offensive core together where he took a huge step last season, and I think he can take an even bigger step this season and absolutely dominate the East and will be the most outstanding player at the end of the season. All right, I think we covered quite a bit today. Do you have any final thoughts before this season gets underway in the CFL?
I'm just glad there's going to be a season. It was looking a little bit dicey there with all the negotiations going back and forth between the players in the league, but I'm glad that they were able to come to an agreement and that we will have football. It's always exciting for the season to start, kind of getting things started before the NFL really gets ramped up, so it's kind of the only football we have for a little while. So I'm excited to see the great competition in the West, and then maybe see if there's any sort of dark horse teams coming out of the East that we weren't really anticipating. So yeah, just excited to see how it all shakes down.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much for helping us out today with the CFL preview, and enjoy the season.
Will do, man. Always fun to be on the show.
All right, as always, follow us on Squib Kick Radio on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And we will talk to you next week.
I got you stuck off the realness. Think not, the shit's too hot. Too hot. Too hot. Rock you in your face. Dab your brain with your nose bone. I'm a vampire walking on the surface of the sun.